Hey everybody, Dave Whitmer, CEO of Best Practice Networks. I have a special guest. Just met today. Had a little introductory call. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Cary Sparrow, who is the CEO of Greenwich HR. So, welcome.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so we had a little conversation about new puppies. So I'm not sure if we'll hear one in the back or if you're in the office or home or not, but be patient. Um, so Interestingly enough, in the conversation before here, so Carrie actually works with somebody that I sort of help with some of the marketing. So I was very curious to learn more about the product and I'm pretty excited about this. So just to set the stage, why don't you tell us a bit about the company and what it does? So just so we can have some context.
Sure, sure. So Greenwich.HR, I founded in 2015 after coming out of global leadership roles in consulting and in corporate HR and IT. And I'll give you a little bit of why I founded the company. But we've put together the largest and the fastest growing source of real-time information about hiring and pay in the world. And that's traditionally been provided to big companies that have strong analytics teams that span financial services, hedge funds, media companies, corporations that are looking at compensation, recruiting firms, HR consulting firms, folks that really need a very powerful, robust data set to build into their own products and services that show who's hiring, what are they hiring for, how much are they paying, all in real time. So not like comp surveys that are lagged and blinded, but real time, transparent, very, very large. We track in the US alone, we track data from about 57 countries right now, but in the US alone, as an example, we track about 80% of all the new jobs that are being created in the US. And we do it every day. So we get a full snapshot of everything that's in the market every day. And we're able to discern what's the content of those jobs. And one of the things that we do pretty uniquely well is we're able to figure out what employers are expecting to pay for those jobs. And so that's then turned itself into an extension of the business, moving beyond just kind of access to our data platform into a new product, which we've just come out of beta on, called WageScape, which allows any HR manager, compensation manager, recruiter, operations leader, anyone who's interested in hiring and retaining talent to see what's happening with pay and hiring real time for any job, any location, any company. And so it's a compensation and hiring intelligence portal. And even though we just came out of beta, it's really been taking off. We've got a ton of interest among clients and among partners that are interested in building it into their own products. And so that's something new that we can talk a little bit more about.
Perfect. Yeah. So this is in the conversation to just to piece some of the gaps here. So you've been basically selling or aggregating this data and get and large companies, financial services type of companies have been tapping into this data for years, but now you've decided to effectively leverage that data um, directly to the human capital market.
That's right. We have sold to HR buyers and HR consulting buyers and recruiting firms throughout. So we cover a whole spectrum with our data
Mhm.
services. But you're right. It's been folks that either that have invested pretty heavily in very savvy analytics capability
Mhm.
and know how to deal with a very, kind of a big data environment, have the team and the tools to do that. And most of our clients for our data services actually build our data into products and services that they then sell themselves. So
Yeah.
that's really been the focus. But now you're exactly right. We wanted to see in early 2021 when the labor market really started going sideways, coming out of COVID, and pay levels started going up. Remote work was creating big opportunities, but also big confusion and big pain points. and hiring was at very different levels. So you had wage inflation, you had actual inflation starting. We saw that there was an opportunity that the story that our data could tell was very different than data that was typically available, which is backwards looking and not detailed enough to be practical. We saw that a lot of companies were starting to kind of be flying blind when it comes to recruiting and retention in particular and setting pay policies. And we had the view on what was actually happening. So
Very
we
cool.
started looking for partners that could actually build an application that was targeted to end users on this. And we couldn't land anyone that could actually handle the challenge. So we ended up building that ourselves. And so and it's been really very, very well received. We
Awesome.
oversubscribed the beta. We came out of beta 2 months early. We began selling uh, pretty much as soon as we started the beta program. We were
Yeah.
landing sales. So
So in typical fashion, I'm going to take the flow out here and say, I'm curious to heck to find out more about you and your background inside that brain to figure this out. Where did you come from and how did you think this was something that you could pull off?
yeah, yeah. So um, a friend of mine refers to my career as a purple squirrel. It's not something you find very often in nature. I studied computer engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic. The United States Navy was kind enough to pay for my education, and so when I graduated, I became a submarine officer in the Navy and served there for 8 years, and developed a lot of experiences that paid off well later on. But I went into management consulting and specifically HR consulting when I got out of the Navy, and I worked for a firm that's a predecessor for Willis Towers Watson. I worked for Towers
Mm,
Perrin, and I
yeah,
um, had a career, a very full career at that firm. Went on to become a global practice leader and led a practice around building and strengthening the performance of HR functions, and that included a lot of work around HR technology, very large change efforts, and a lot of analytics. And became exposed to analytics in an HR context there. I then went to work for a company, a very large multinational company called Cargill, based here in Minneapolis, which is where I live, and was responsible for upgrading their global HR infrastructure. I sat on the leadership teams of HR and IT. It was kind of a joint role, and was responsible for upgrading the technology, the processes, the governance, the data capabilities, the structure of HR, and so forth. And along the way, got exposed to seeing just how big of a bottleneck um, poor data is and what the opportunity for good data is in an HR context. So, I've got a business background that's kind of grounded in economics. And so I look at the labor market as hugely inefficient because the information about it is just so poor,
yeah, absolutely.
especially when you use as a benchmark the information about financial markets. And I knew that inefficiency was manifesting itself in terms of just a ton of extra work to figure out really basic questions around pay and hiring and career options. The labor market, if you think about it, touches every one of our lives. Jobs and
Yeah,
pay touches the lives of every individual on the planet. If you think about it, every family, every community, every business and organization, every government, it's huge. And yet the information about it is really, really awful.
yeah,
And the root cause of the information historically being awful had to do with how unavailable it is. But that's very rapidly changing. And so this was back in the 2014 timeframe where HR was as a function was moving technology to the cloud very rapidly. Even at a global level, a number of companies were presenting global solutions for cloud-based technology, which was addressing one of the root causes of really bad information in HR, which was consolidating all the sources of information down to a more manageable number of platforms. The other barrier for being able to have useful information about jobs and pay and so forth was that everybody talked a different language. A lawyer in one company could mean something totally different than a lawyer in another company in in another country. At When I was at Cargill, though, we worked really hard to create a common taxonomy in terms of how to look at jobs worldwide. And so I knew that this issue was a solvable issue. And as I started talking with technology vendors to me and our team, and I laid out kind of this idea that you're solving the biggest barriers of really poor labor market information. And I know that as soon as you start to have better information about a huge market. I mean, the labor market worldwide is, as of last year, was over $80 trillion, and it's like
Mhm.
19 trillion in the US right now. So as soon as you start making that more transparent, then awesome opportunities develop in lots of unexpected ways for innovation, not just better efficiency, although that's really big too, especially for an HR audience. And so
Mhm.
I would kind of lay this out and say, you guys, the vendors of these large global vendors of HR services, are at the forefront of this, and I know that you invest in a lot in R&D. And so tell me what you see coming down the road in terms of new innovations and stuff so that we can begin anticipating those. And I would get a lot of nodding heads to a point, but at some point the eyes would start to glaze over. And I realized pretty quickly that nobody was really seriously working on the kind of opportunity that I saw. Now, there were a
Yeah.
number of firms that frankly are investing in that, but I thought pretty clearly that there was an opportunity here. And when I left Cargill, I started Greenwich.hr on the idea that we could focus on making the labor market more transparent. And this is where kind of my global experience, my HR experience, my engineering experience kind of all came together to put together a technology platform that instead of going out and surveying, folks, or actually goes online and
Yeah.
looks at all the information that's available online about what people are hiring and how much they're expecting to pay. And we got pretty clever on a couple things. We got a couple things patented, um, and started with a really small team, and then landed a couple of really well-known accounts that then allowed us to kind of bootstrap our way up to where we are today.
Yeah. Well, unless your office floats, right? Your purple squirrel analogy, is very fitting because the out and about for 8 years doesn't match the rest of the equation. But if you remove that little 8 year, that almost decade, the rest just makes perfect sense. So
Yeah.
that's cool. And so in the market, then there's now you're up against some very well-known people in the space, right? PayScale, you know, salary.com, and so what's different about you guys compared to some of those people that are pretty much trusted household HR names?
Yeah, so we're pretty careful to clarify that we're not, our data is, and the WageScape tool is not a replacement to traditional compensation benchmarking, which looks at, what should existing employees pay. This is what WageScape shows is what companies are expecting to pay for the jobs that they are hiring right now. So it's at the margin of the economy. It's what is the next job going to cost? And from that, you can figure out how much are wages going up for specific jobs in specific markets as of today.
Hmm.
So if you got on our website and you look at the demo for WageScape, you can see that it's, day to day that it's updated. And that's something that's very different. The firms that you mentioned draw their information mostly from two sources, mostly from salary surveys that are administered over the course of typically a calendar year, consolidated from a number of companies, but they measure what existing employees are getting paid. And those
Yeah.
are based on pay decisions that were made sometime in the past before the data itself was
Yeah.
collected. So also there's regulations that dictate that that kind of information can't be transparent. You have to blind who the companies are. You have to lag the data by several months in order to, at least in the US, and then outside of the US, the requirements are can be a bit even more stringent.
Yeah.
There's no requirements on the transparency of ours because we get it from transparent sources in the beginning. Companies, are advertising what they're hiring
Yeah.
for and how they're positioning to pay for those jobs, and we're aggregating that at a massive scale. We collect
Very
data on
cool.
about 80% of all the new jobs.
Yeah.
So
So just to give an idea of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cary, but give you an idea. So if you're talking about data that could be a year old, right? So theoretically, in a calendar year, this calendar year, we could have had the great resignation where people were paying, premiums for jobs, and we could be entering into, the start of a recession,
mhm.
right? Which would drastically swing those pays. You know, I wouldn't even want to guess what the ranges might be, but
Ye-
it could be huge, and
yeah,
probably upwards of 25% in some industries, right?
yep,
So so having real-time data is pretty important.
yep. It is, and I'll go a step further. But just to reinforce what you just said, looking at all jobs across all markets for the last 18 months, the advertised wages have gone up 30%. And most
Wow.
companies in my career and yours have worked off a 2 to 4% salary
Hmm.
budget every year. So totally out of bounds with prior expectations. But when you look at it, earlier this year, if you were talking to anyone that was in the business of selling technology, not IT professionals per se, but the business of selling technology, or anyone that touched the real estate market,
Hmm.
their world was collapsing around them. And we were getting a lot of news about layoffs. We were getting a lot of news about businesses that were really having to hunker down and even being very threatened. But if you looked at retail or many parts of manufacturing or definitely supply chain, hospitality, those folks hadn't gotten the memo that there was an impending recession. They were
Hmm.
still and still are hiring at rates that are above pre-pandemic levels.
Hmm.
Now, I think the outlook is continuing to get more grim, and more companies are, especially larger companies, are scaling back their hiring in anticipation of a more difficult economic environment right now. But what you just said about real time applies not only for what's happening at this point in time across all jobs, but what's happening at this point in time for any specific job or sector of jobs, because the picture is completely different. Also, the need to understand what's happening locally. What's happening with pay for any given job varies across markets pretty substantially, and not according to historic, location differentials. The whole idea of remote work has really kind of put pressure on that whole approach, and the skills that are needed that are being hired for in local markets also varies substantially for a given job. So it's a much more complex environment that we're operating in now, and the data sources, with the exception of our platform, really haven't kept up with that.
Hmm. Hmm. So what would like I'm sure, give me an example without naming names or anything like that, but give me an example about somebody that successfully used this.
So
Right.
we work for a really large retailer. Um, Everyone would know their name. And they're intensely interested on remaining competitive for key positions in the markets that they operate in. So they monitor the pay practices of all the retail stores and all the retail operators in every market that they're in. And when they see those pay changes, like new pay policies, like back in 2020, uh, it was pioneering to start to raise your starting pay during
Hmm.
that time period. But the ability to detect when companies were doing that, and formulate a response that was very localized, was something that this company did extremely well, I would say. They were intensely focused on staying competitive from that standpoint.
Very
So
cool.
so that's one example. And there's others in terms of, we have some of the larger consulting firms use our data. One of the HR consulting firms in particular recognized that traditional salary data presented a gap in terms of what was happening in the market. So responded to that by building an entire tool set that overlays their clients' individual data with their survey data, with our kind of real-time market data, all in one set of visualizations that they've then took to market and are seeing great demand for. So they're another one that I think really kind of was ahead of the curve.
Yeah, so they're making money off of stuff they can buy direct.
Right. Right.
Anyway,
Right.
which it is what it is, but
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. And so like walk me through maybe a scenario that somebody, or a couple scenarios that somebody might be a perfect candidate. Like what would this look like for an HR person sitting in their office going, oh crap, how do I, and do whatever, right? So what would be an instance that they would need you for?
Yeah. So right now it's a good time for that question because most companies are in the middle of gearing up their budgeting for 2023 and are looking at what do we need to put in for labor costs. And so for open positions and for positions of growth, putting in uh, a projected cost based on what you've historically paid those positions is not going to be particularly useful for most companies.
Hmm.
So understanding in the specific markets that you're looking at, what's the prevailing starting or offered wage, and who are the competitors that are hiring from you, and is especially relevant to be able to figure out what your costs are likely to be. You can click down on that a bit further and then start answering questions. If you have a choice between where you put team members, new team members, whether it's Lexington, Kentucky, or Houston, Texas, or Phoenix, Arizona, for example, being able to go in and look at the talent conditions and the wage conditions in each of those markets greatly informs those situations. So these are actual use cases. The one you and I were talking about this a little bit before the call. The use case that is emerging now is being able to see retention risks more clearly. In the past, the strong wisdom was that you pay attention to culture as the primary lever for addressing retention risks, and included in culture is leadership capability. Because folks have a tight connection with their immediate supervisors and their supervisors. Given how fast wages are coming up, wages are now making a material impact on retention risks. So regardless of how much somebody loves the company, if they have an opportunity, in some cases, the folks have opportunities to see a 50% increase in their pay, and especially in an environment where you're starting to see inflation come up, and especially food costs going up,
Yeah.
that is a big consideration regardless of the level of loyalty to
Yeah.
a company.
Yeah, for so many years, decades, it was always about, it's not about pay, it's not about, it's about the fit and the ability to learn. But, you were talking about, a 2 to a 5% swing,
Hmm.
right? Now that you start talking, 20, 30, 50%, that's significant, right?
Yeah,
And so all those old analogies or thoughts sort of kind of go out the window, right? And
yeah,
you'll take a risk for 50%. You might not take a risk for 3%, but you'll take a risk for 50%. So
yeah,
yeah,
yep.
it's good to know. Yeah.
Also, it means that your competitors for your talent have totally shifted. So, a client of ours sources folks for machine shop operations. And historically, there's a group of skilled workers in machine shops that not senior, but that the starting wage is not uncommon to be between 15 and 18 an hour.
Hmm.
And right now, um, most fast food places in many parts of the country are offering exactly that range.
Right, right.
And so, lots of folks have very different choices available to them in terms of where they go to work. And it's not just wage inflation, it's about where's what is it going to take to attract people too.
Hmm.
So, back to your question, who would find these kinds of insights and the WageScape tool, who ideally anyone who's worried about retention, hiring, budgeting, really needs to see what's happening in real time.
Yeah, well, could you imagine the millions that you could save just by having the, I hate to use it, but if you're Amazon, dropping in facility centers or distribution centers to be able to say, this town or that town, we have to hire 400 people, right? Then you could, match the skill sets and you could just save thousands, right?
Yep.
Millions of dollars just by doing a proper pay analysis, right?
Well, and I think more and more companies are realizing that, especially since we just had this amazing experiment about remote and distributed work.
Hmm.
You've got entire companies that have been formed since the pandemic started that are built from the ground up on a distributed model. And their flexibility and their access to talent is very different from folks that are looking at traditional locations and traditional work environments for the talent that they source. You know, Again, going back to what choices do your candidates have when you're evaluating how to recruit them and how to win them to your company? It's totally different now than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, is there anything else that you want to cover, Terry, or
I would say that the outlook is pretty amazing. The point that you brought up earlier, that things are changing so fast that companies have to look at different ways to see what's happening in the market. I think that there are 2 years from now, information providers for labor market intelligence will have evolved. And
yeah,
so dealing with a market that's much more dynamic and much more variable locally is something that will be addressed. But in the meantime, I think that there's a real gap in traditional sources of market intelligence, and that's what we're working really hard to address.
yeah, no, and Carrie told me his price point. Like this is a credit card purchase. This isn't a crazy ticket. So people should ask the questions and get in for a demo. That's for sure.
Yep. Yeah, and like I said, you can see it online. We've got a demo on our website, so folks can just jump on it and see it, and you can see the pricing right there. So,
Yeah, and of course, if anybody's looking at this, no matter where it is, whether it's on the site or YouTube, you'll see there's links to contact information for Gary as well as to the site, and if the demo's a unique link, I'll put that in there too, so you guys can get informed and and Kara will provide me with the right contact information for however he wants to handle anybody that has inquiries. So away we
yep,
go. Yeah,
sure will. Just reach
awesome,
out. Okay.
perfect. That's good. That's it's it. I think it's awesome. I think you're going to do very very well with this. So
Yep, we're feeling really positive too.
yeah,
So, good.
yeah,
Well, thanks, David,
absolutely.
for having me on today.
No, it's good. It's good fun. Thanks for telling us what you do, and hopefully we can help a whole bunch of people make better decisions. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.